Hi everyone, I'm Jane at Rockin' Worms. I hope you're having a good day. What I'm doing today is starting to gear up for Breeder Bin Reset Weekend. It is Wednesday today, and I will be working on my breeder bins in some capacity or another for the next 4 to 5, maybe even 6 days, depending on what life throws me. So since I am starting to look at my breeder bins and see where they are in the process, I thought I'd bring you along and share with you what I'm looking at and looking for. So let's get into it. This is the first breeder bin. Wrong bin, cameraman. This is the first bin that we're going to look at. This breeder bin has approximately 700 worms in it, give or take a few. And the first thing I want to notice is the condition of the newspaper on top. This is the newspaper they started with. I have not replaced it. I have not added moisture to the bin. I have not added additional food to the bin. So this is what it looks like after basically being left alone for, I think it's about 16 days right now. Okay, now the breeder cycle for red wigglers is 21 days, but again, it doesn't mean that you can't do something with your breeders in a shorter time frame, which is what I have started moving toward, so I can prep my breeder bins for not only resetting them into new beddings and start a new breeding cycle, but also to harvest castings. Because with my new breeder bedding mix, I am getting more and more castings out of my breeder bins as well as cocoons. And talking about cocoons, let's look at a couple here. Here's a whole bunch right here, 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 back over here. I mean, and these are just the ones on the top. Over here, you can see a whole bunch. So, yeah, the breeders are doing their job and making me a bunch of cocoons. And again, these are just the ones on the top. So the reason I'm looking at the status of the newspaper is I'm going to use it as a rough indication of how the breeders are going through the food that I mix into the bin with the worm chow, and also the biota that is in my pre-compost and cow manure mix that I use as my base bedding, okay? I'm kind of saying to myself, if there is a lot of newspaper left, then they haven't used up all the food in the bin. If there's not a lot of newspaper left, I'm saying that they've used most of the food in the bin, and I might want to think about what I'm going to do about that going forward. So what I'm doing now is gently aerating this breeder bin because, like I said, I am getting ready to reset the bin, and I'm going to start pulling out these worms. Look at these guys. Look at these guys. Oh my gosh. Beautiful, bulgy clitellum. Fat worm. Here's a couple more. And those lovely yellow tails that indicate that they're part of the Asenia family. Okay. Beautiful worms, beautiful worms. Okay. So because my worms are turning the bedding into castings so quickly, I want to sift out some of these castings to reduce the bedding volume and also, you know, have the castings to use. Now, how do I know that these are castings? Okay. Maybe I'm new at the game and I'm like, oh, I'm not really sure. Well, let me show you what the raw bedding, so to speak, looks like. This is my bedding mix before any worm has touched it. No worms have ever been in this. This is a mixture of my pre-compost and cow manure. In fact, I don't even have this fully mixed up. I just started putting this together last night. And the cow manure is really dry, So what I've learned to do is kind of do a lasagna layer in a bin where I'm mixing up my bedding. So the moisture from the pre-compost can start rehydrating the cow manure. So when I go to start mixing it like this, I don't have this big poof of dry cow manure going into the air, which, you know, gets all over everything. And also, I could be breathing it in, and that's not healthy to be breathing in, you know, powdered cow manure. So I've just, again, learned through experimenting to do a little lasagna layer so my cow manure will start to rehydrate. Anyways, that's just a little tip. But this is what the raw bedding looks like. You can see it's very chunky. There's lots of bits of grass in there. There's bits of cardboard shred that has been softened, but certainly not completely consumed by the biota. And let me give you a side-by-side comparison, okay? You can see, I hope, that these are distinctly different looking substrates, all right? So you can see also, let me drop this one, how fine the particles are in here. That's because they're little itty bitty worm poop, right? And you can see how much coarser this material is because it hasn't yet been processed. Okay, so that is one way you can tell castings from your unprocessed bedding. Now let me move this unprocessed bedding out of the way here so I can just swing this bin around momentarily, because I'm not doing a lot in the bin other than doing a fluff, because I want to start drying this down slowly over the next several days so I can sift out a lot of these castings as part of my breeder reset, okay? Now I may or may not, look at just more cocoons everywhere. You just saw me fluff everything up. So these cocoons are just where they are. And I haven't, you know, put them there to fake show you. That's just where they are throughout the bin. Okay, so I'm just gonna set this one aside. So this bin is looking great. There's a lot of, you know, there's good moisture in it. And I do want to start drying it down just a little bit to make sifting easier. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to put this back on my shelf here because I'm not going to do anything with it in the next day or so. This is the next breeder bin I want to show you. This bin has approximately, I don't remember, 750 or so. Is that correct?
855.
Oh, 855. Okay, that one had 700. This one has about 850 breeders in it. Now, again, the first thing I want to look at is the status of the newspaper. It's damp, so I know I have good moisture in here. And you can see that there seems to be about the same, maybe a little less newspaper in here than there was in the 700 breeder bin. And again, this just indicates to me that there's still decent amounts of, let me get rid of that, decent amount of food left in this bin. Biota, as well as, I doubt that there's any worm chow left, but there was enough worm chow in there with the biota to keep these worms fed and happy during the last, 16 days or so. So again, look at, oh, hey, look at this. This is a breeding pair right here. If you haven't had an opportunity to see a breeding pair, this is one right here. They are hooked at their clitellum, which is where they do the sperm exchange. And each one will get the sperm from the opposite worm, and that sperm will then fertilize their eggs, Okay, so they keep their eggs and they exchange the sperm. When they're done mating, the worms will uncouple, go their separate ways, and each one of them will then have a cocoon, which has eggs and sperm in it, and we'll deposit that cocoon into the bedding. And the actual fertilization goes on within the cocoon, okay? So that's cool to see. I'm just gonna place those over here out of the way so they can finish their job, okay? So again, I'm aerating this. Moisture is good for the worms. It's a little bit, you know, moist for sifting, but I could sift it. But this is looking good. So the other thing I want to talk about, that I'm playing with, is the amount of bedding I have in here. Not only vis-a-vis the worm population, but also the size of the bin. So I have previously had about 600 worms, give or take again, in a breeder bin with approximately 6 gallons of bedding. 6 gallons, 3 gallons, I'm sorry, 3 gallons of bedding. And that bedding is split, again, approximately 50-50 now between pre-compost and cow manure. But since the number of breeders in my bins have increased, I have increased the amount of the bedding I've put into it. So each bin on this round was the first time I increased the bedding to 4 gallons of bedding for the amount of worms in the bin. And so I'm also looking to say, hey, how did the worms, this amount of worms, go through that amount of bedding? Did they turn it mostly into castings? And the answer to me clearly is yes. So this amount of worms, which is 850 worms, give or take, with 4 gallons of my bedding, they were able to process it in about 16 days. That's like awesome. So I'm getting a ton of castings out of my breeders. Okay. Now here's the other side. Let me just finish fluffing this. Oop, that's where those breeders were hooked up, mating. I'm gonna leave that corner alone. I just wanna, again, do a quick fluff. I wanna get some air in here and get, you know, start getting some of the little moisture out. What is this? I don't know what this is. Oh, it's just a little compacted muddy spot. Okay, no big deal. Okay, let me put this back. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next bin. So, yeah, so I just started putting 4 gallons of bedding into these bins, but I tell you, these bins are starting to get heavy for me. This one has almost 1,000, has 950-ish worms in it. The bins are starting to get a little heavy for me to lift and maneuver on and off the shelf. And I don't want to add more weight to the bins. One, I'm stressing the plastic of the bins. These are Sterilite bins. But also, it's just harder physically for me. So I need to analyze the bin bedding amount with the amount of worms in here and decide where I'm like, no mas. I'm not adding more worms because I'm not adding more bedding, okay? Now, let's get into this bin and I can continue to talk. You can clearly see right away that most of the newspaper is gone. There's very little left. So compared to the other bins, which had less worms, but approximately the same amount of bedding, more worms are just chewing through the whole thing faster. So again, that means to me that I may be reaching the limit of the number of worms in this amount of bedding for the time frame that I'm looking at, which is 16 days now, but overall 21 days for the breeding cycle. So it's just data, okay? This is information I'm getting from looking at my worms and thinking about what I did and if whether or not I need to change anything going forward or if I want to change anything going forward. Because let's look at these worms. These worms, look at this. I don't think anyone can tell me that these worms are not healthy looking, that they're not plump, hydrated, well-fed, and obviously have very healthy looking clitellums and good coloration. So what I'm doing in this bin seems to be a-okay with the worms in this bin. So now that I know that they're okay, I need to analyze, is it okay with me? And that's where I circle back a little worm ball there. I don't know why, but yeah, look at that. Just beautiful. I need to circle back to, is this working for me? And that's where I come back to, well, the bin's getting a little heavy. And I don't want to stress myself and I don't want to break a bin. Oh my God, that would be a disaster. You know, crack a bin or something. So I have reached, I think, pretty much my limit on what I'm willing to put into these bins. I want to emphasize that it is my limit, okay? I have read on YouTube, watched YouTube videos and seen where other worm keepers will put in like almost 2,000 worms into a bin this size and have even less bedding in here for their worms to operate in during the breeding cycle. And you know what? If that works for them and it works for their worms, I'm happy for them. You do what, you know, works for you and what you're comfortable with. But for me, it's just a little too much, okay? I can feel a little compaction down here. So I want to break this up. And this is something actually that I wasn't anticipating seeing, but this again is important information because I have, actually in this bin, I have almost 4.5 gallons of bedding. The weight of that bedding plus the moisture is starting to compact the bottom of this bin. Now again, this isn't necessarily bad. I obviously want to make sure that I don't have any anaerobic activity going on because it's packed. Nope, I'm not smelling anything bad. Sour odors, rotten vomit odors are signs of anaerobic, but I'm not smelling that. So I don't have anaerobic activity in here, thankfully, but I am starting to get compaction. Now, if I was running a CFT, a continuous flow bin, that kind of compaction is actually what you're sort of looking for because at the bottom of your CFT, it keeps all your castings from just falling out onto the floor. You need a little compaction to hold the upper levels in place. But in a bin structure like this, I'm not really looking for that compaction. I don't really want it. I don't want to even have the possibility of an anaerobic happening. So again, it's just another piece of data that signals to me that in this bin, I've kind of reached the maximum. I don't want to add any more bedding. And because I choose, I also don't want to add any more worms into this, okay? So I hope that kind of explains what I'm thinking as I'm seeing this kind of information and data when I'm going through my breeder bin preparatory to sifting and also for the reset. So you need to pay, you need to pay attention to what's going on in your bins and not just la-di-da-di-da, I just pull out worms and put them in a new bin and everything's great. And it could be great, and it probably will be great, but you're missing opportunities to better your system and your management of your worms to maximize whatever goals you're looking to do, whether that is growing your population, growing the size of your worms or, you know, increasing your casting production, okay? So look at your bins, get some information, and then start making decisions on how to make it better. Okay, the last bin I'm gonna show you is this one. This is my brand new 4th breeder bin. Yay, I finally expanded into 4 breeder bins. And you can see that the newspaper is 100% intact. And the data I get from that is this. One, this breeder bin is approximately 6 days younger than all the other bins. I started this one 6 days after the other 3, okay? So the worms haven't had as much time to get into the newspaper, and also you can clearly see that they haven't had as much time to get into the bedding. See how much chunkier this bedding looks, how much less processed this bedding looks than the bedding in the other 3 bins. But it's clearly more processed. Let me slide this one over. Clearly more processed than the raw bedding. Okay, so they're doing their job. They just need more time. And also, they need more worms, okay? This is a new bedding. I have the video where I set this exact bin up step by step for you guys, and I'll link that into the description so you can watch that. This breeder bin has, I'm guessing, around 400 to 500 worms, okay? I did not count the worms in. I will do that when I reset this one, not this weekend, but the following weekend. And yes, I know that I'm disturbing them mid-breeder cycle, but they'll get over it, okay? And I just want to show you, you know, the amount of worms. You can see that it's, you know, significantly less number of worms than are in the other bins, okay? And again, this just makes sense, right? I have less worms, the bin is less old, so the bedding is less processed, and the newspaper is less eaten, okay? All right. And by the way, here's a cocoon in here too, I think. Here's a cocoon. So, yeah, they're in there doing their job. Just got to give them a, you know, a chance to do it. So this bin, I am going to cover back up because I'm not going to hassle it again for another week and a half. But I did want to show you, you know, how the bins differ based on the number of worms you have in there and the time that they've been working. All right. So that's what I wanted to show you today. Again, I hope you got some information out of this that can help you run your worm bins, particularly breeder bins, more in line with what your goals are, in line with what, you know, your worm population is and what your bedding and newspaper are doing. All right. So thank you very much for watching. I ask you to please like and subscribe. It does help me a great deal with my channel. And to that point, I just want to take a moment and thank everybody who has liked and particularly subscribed to my channel. It's doing really well for a new channel, and I'm so happy and proud and grateful that we're coming together as a community and sharing information and helping each other out. It's fantastic. I'm blown away about how, you know, how much support you guys are giving me, and I ask you to continue to do so. So have a good rest of your day. I am, as always, yours in the dirt, Jane.